Good morning, and welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Society of Albany, and we especially welcome visitors to our service. My name is Albert DeSalvo, and I'm the Service Associate today. This morning, we welcome to our pulpit Dr. Alice Green. Dr. Green is the Executive Director of the Center for Law and Justice, a civil rights organization that she founded in 1985. She has a doctorate in criminal justice and 3 master's degrees: education, social work, and criminology. The center provides community education on civil and criminal justice, legal guidance and advocacy, crisis intervention, and community planning and organizing around criminal justice, civil rights, and civil liberties issues of particular concern to poor communities and those of color. In 1985, Governor Mario Cuomo appointed Dr. Green to membership on the Citizens Policy Complaint Review Council of the New York State Commission of Corrections. A year later, with Senate approval, he appointed her to the position of Deputy Commissioner of the New York State Division of Probation and Correctional Alternatives. She was put in charge of strategic planning, policy, and information. After leaving the state service, she became legislative director of the New York Civil Liberties Union, where she had served as director of their Albany office in 1982. Dr. Green writes and lectures on racism and criminal justice, and often does commentary and analysis for a number of newspapers and television and radio programs. With Dr. Frankie Bailey, she co-authored the book, Law Never Here, A Social History of African American Responses to Issues of Crime and Justice, and also 2 books about prohibition. Alice Green is a member of the Board of Directors of the New York State Defenders Association, the Vice President of Senior Hope, an alcohol and drug counseling program, and member of the Advisory Board of the Capital District Chapter of the New York Civil Liberties Union. She is a founder of the African American Cultural Center of the Capital Region. For over 20 years, she worked as a prison volunteer. And I know also that Alice never sleeps. This is from Dr. Green. Some believe that African Americans gained their freedom in 1865. They have little to no understanding of the horrendous history visited upon Africans from the time they were kidnapped, brought to this country, enslaved and oppressed for 405 years into the present day. There is no or little understanding of the post-traumatic slave syndrome. This continues to enslave us all. We cannot move towards true equity and justice without understanding and reckoning with history and repairing the harm done to Black people. As with the 1619 Project reminds us, to understand the present, we must clearly see the past. And this is from the organization Ivory Innovations. The call for reparations is grounded in recognition of the systemic injustices that have impacted African Americans throughout American history. Beyond the impacts of slavery itself and its legacy, which are numerous and profound, racial discrimination in lending and housing policies are central to this rationale. For instance, redlining, a practice sanctioned by the federal government in the 1930s, systemically denied African Americans access to mortgage financing and confined them to poorer neighborhoods, while simultaneously devaluing properties in predominantly Black areas. These actions obstructed wealth accumulation and undermined economic stability in Black communities. These injustices extend beyond explicit racial discrimination. Urban renewal programs of the mid-20th century often dubbed Negro removal by critics, displaced countless African American families, eroding community bonds and heritage. And certainly, those of you who have been in Albany for a few years or a lot of years know that this has happened here, not only in our traditionally black neighborhoods, but also downtown where the Empire State Plaza was built. These programs frequently targeted black neighborhoods for redevelopment purporting progress while effectively demolishing established communities for highways and commercial development without fair compensation or viable housing alternatives. The long-term effects of these policies are still evident today in the socioeconomic status and infrastructure disparities across racial lines. We will now do the chalice lighting. And please join us when you see the screen. Welcoming all free seekers of truth and meaning, we gather to excite the human spirit, to inspire its growth and development, to respond morally and ethically to a troubled world, and to sustain a vital and nurturing religious community.
It's so nice to be here. Thank you for the invitation. As I listened to what you were saying, it reminds me of the problem. We have been talking about reparations. We have been talking about racism. We have talked a little bit about history, but unfortunately, we have not talked about it, I think, in the right way, because so much has been left out. So my message today is straightforward, but it's not simple, and it's influenced by an African mythology of the Sankofa bird, which I thought we had up here. Anyways, what it basically says, in order to really understand what's going on today, there it is, we must go back to the past. And that's what we've been doing lately, because we realize that we're missing the message. We talk a lot, but we don't understand the real history that has put us in the situation that we're in today. And I think about this also as I look at the work that we're doing, and I'm influenced to start beginning a different conversation because of a couple of projects that we have been working on at the center. One is what we call Zero Youth Detention. It is a program that the county came to us with about 5 years ago. And they asked the center if we could look at the problem of the disproportionate incarceration of Black children. So we took on that project. We worked on it for 3 years with a task force that included many people from our community. We finished it and gave it to the county. The county took a look at it, and they've been silent ever since. And I think one of the reasons is that people don't understand what we need to do to make the kinds of changes that must be made. Nobody wanted to talk about not putting children in prison. That's something that had to be. And we're saying, no, it does not have to be. So they're still working on a myth about history. They don't understand the condition of the children that we're talking about. They just didn't appear out of nowhere. Something happened, and we're not willing to face what happened. The other thing that we were working on this year was Juneteenth. We had a wonderful celebration on the weekend of Juneteenth. Many people came out, politicians came out. Everybody was talking about how wonderful that we can celebrate, finally, the freedom of Black people. I cringed when we said that. And the message I gave at that time was, we're not free, folks. We got a long way to go. But that myth is there, and it serves as a distraction. A lot of the things that we do serve as distractions, and we've got to understand what they are and how do you really do the work that needs to be done. I want you to also tell you that when I was asked to light the chalice, I said, "What is a chalice?" And I said, "What does it mean?" And I was told that it had something to do with lighting the way to truth. Then I said, okay, that resonates with me, because that's what we want to do. The truth is not nice. It's been sanitized, and it's been misinterpreted. Everything you can think of has been done to it so that we don't have to face the truth. So at the center, we're saying we're going to start a project that will try to talk about the truth. And so lighting the chalice, which talks about truth, I'm going to talk about truth. But the other thing we want to talk about is freedom. This is my song that I brought with me.
We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Until the killing of Black men, Black mothers, sons is as important as the killing of white men, white mothers, sons. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Not needing to clutch for power, not needing the light just to shine on me. I need to be just one in the number as we stand against tyranny. To me, young people come first. They come first. They have the courage where we fail. If I can just shine a light on as they carry us through the gale. We who believe in freedom cannot rest.
play that because those are the words of Ella Baker from the civil rights movement. She's a woman who was sort of hidden behind the walls because women weren't supposed to be out in front talking about things like civil rights and protests and all of that. But she tells the truth. In order for us to gain the freedom that we must have, it doesn't come easy and it takes a long time. So what I wanted to do is give you sort of a brief introduction to what we're going to be doing to try to get those messages across. And I'm helped here and aided and assisted by Trey, I'm sorry, you're up there. Trey Sean and Jeremy Clement's going to be with us as well. So we're going to use a number of things to get our message across. Some of it's going to be narrative. We use the video, the music. We also have photos. We have things that we want to talk about. We want to get people to start thinking about that history that we've left behind and the impact of it. The important thing is, what is the impact of what we've done? Okay, so that's what we're going to try to do. I'm not a good tech person, so I might have some problems, and I'll be waving up there at Tayshawn to help me out. Because of Juneteenth, a lot of people did start talking about, what does it really mean? Are we really free or not? I had a little girl who came up to me after I did a presentation last week. She was about 7, I don't think any older than 8. And she said to me, why didn't we get freed by the Revolutionary War? And I had to explain to her what it meant. That, our Declaration of Independence, our Constitution, all those things were written by white men who owned property, and they also owned slaves. And so she wanted to know more about that. Her mom was there, and so we started talking. This is the kind of thing that we have to talk to people about. So what we're doing now is just trying to figure out exactly what we can talk about. And I'm also doing some readings. One of them you probably read was Charles, I'll read part of it, but I think it had so much. Charles Blow from the New York Times had written something on Juneteenth. He said, emancipation was not true freedom, not in Texas and not in most of the American South, where the vast majority of Black people lived. It was quasi-freedom. It was an ostensible freedom. It was freedom with more strings attached than a marionette. Most Black people couldn't claim their freedom on June 19th, 1865, because their bodies and their free will were still being policed to nearly the same degree and with the same inveterate racism that Southern whites had aimed at them. The laws governing the formerly enslaved were very restrictive in terms of where they could go and what kinds of jobs they could have, where they could live in certain communities. Most white Texans desired to keep Blacks as close to their formerly enslaved status as possible. Therefore, they fiercely resisted any actions that would potentially elevate Blacks to a competitive social, political, and economic status. This was true throughout much of the former Confederacy. So his comments started us to seriously think about what can we do, what kinds of issues can we raise, how can we celebrate, how do we get people to celebrate Juneteenth, but also realize that it's not true freedom. So we have largely hidden the extent of the violence that was suffered by Blacks at the hands of white capitalists and white supremacists, and the horror stories are deeply buried, but must be uncovered if we are to move forward and repair the damage. I just want to introduce a few of those things because we pass over stuff, like, for instance, the Middle Passage. The assumption was uh, came here, blacks came here from Africa. No, they didn't come here from Africa. They were kidnapped from Africa, and they were put on ships that were not like your modern day cruise. Okay, a lot happened during that particular period. And so unless we're trying to get people to understand the horror of it, the dehumanizing actions that were taken, because we're trying to get them to have some feeling about what this all means. Because everything that has happened has had a serious impact on us, but we don't want to look at it. As you can see, this is part of the middle passage. People were coming in groves, being brought here in groves. A lot of them, unfortunately, did not survive. One formerly enslaved person, Olada, has written about that experience. He says, the closeness of the place and the heat of the climate added to the number in the ship, which was so crowded that each had scarcely room to turn himself, almost suffocating us. This produced copious perspiration so that the air soon became unfit for respiration from a variety of loathsome smells and brought on a sickness among the slaves, of which many died, thus falling victim to the improvident avarice, and I may call it, of their purchaser. This wretched situation was again aggravated by the galling of the chains, now become insupportable, and the filth of the necessary tubs, large buckets for human waste, into which children often fell and were almost suffocated. The shrieks of women and the groans of the dying rendered the whole scene a horror almost inconceivable. That was from 1789. And what people don't understand, that many of the people who became ill on those ships were simply thrown overboard because they were no longer of value. So the Atlantic Ocean is filled with the bodies of black Africans who were thrown overboard. And that's the kind of thing that we don't talk about. When we look at, to the next slide, when we look at the slave experience itself, we don't think about how horrible that was, and it must have an impact. You know, when there's trauma, it just doesn't end after they experience. It's handed down in generation. So the treatment of slaves in the United States often included sexual abuse and rape, the denial of education and punishments like whipping, families, horrible examples of how families were split up by the sale of one or more members, usually never to see each other again. Imagine having your child just taken from you and sold somewhere, or having your husband or your spouse just removed and to never see that person again. And even Frederick Douglass noted that he would, the slave overseer would at times seem to take great pleasure in whipping a slave. I have often been awakened at the dawn of day by the most heart-rending shrieks of an own aunt of mine, whom he used to tie up to a joist and whip upon her naked back till she was literally covered with blood. No words, no tears, no prayers from this gory victim seemed to move this iron heart from its bloody purpose. I remember the first time I ever witnessed a horrible exhibition. I was quite a child, but I will remember it. The thing is, we do remember those traumatic experiences. Even if we look today, and this is interesting because with some of the, I can see it, with some of these slides, some of the younger people don't remember some of the things that happened during the 60s. We do. But it's interesting to look at some of the other things that have happened. I particularly focus on lynching because, again, we don't really get the full impact of what that meant. How you can take someone, hang them up and invite people to come and watch. If you look at the picture on the left, this one really bothers me so much. It's a picture of a hanging, a lynching, and there's a little white girl standing there, and she's not the least bit moved. And that is so hard to take, to imagine. The people who were there, some of them were in their white shirts, which means that they came from church. And they were there to enjoy this terrible, terrible thing that was being done to a Black African. So there are those things. The other photos, of course, one is of Emmett Till, and I know some of you might not remember Emmett Till, but I know I do. I remember my mom said we had to look at the photos of Emmett Till. His mother said, leave his casket open because I want people to see what they did to my child. It was a horrible thing. And at some point around August 28, he was kidnapped, beaten, shot in the head, had a large metal fan tied to his neck and barbed wired, and was thrown into the river. And the report of his death, Till, it was mentioned that they found that Till was killed in Mississippi for whistling at a white woman, which has been recanted, died of a gunshot wound to the head, and that he had broken wrist bones and skull and leg fractures. When the 14-year-old body was pulled from the Tallahatchie River in the summer of 1955, the report said the crown of his head was just crushed out and a piece of his skull just fell out. It was a horrible thing, but we've glossed over. We tell the nice, sanitized versions of everything. But unfortunately, we have to go back and understand the real history if we're going to make the kind of changes that I think we have to make. One of the things that we have missed is that, and as I said, things don't just happen and then you forget about them. Because when I was a little girl, my mother made me talk about Emmett Till. I was frightened to death. It took me many, many years before I would even go to the South. And many of you probably have had experiences that were traumatizing for you. Things like the film Psycho. I still don't take a shower unless all my doors are locked. It didn't leave me. Jaws. I know my husband Charles doesn't like going into the ocean because of Jaws. So what my point is that these things just don't die out. They don't just happen. They're horrible, and you got to know that they're horrible, but they have a lasting impact. And whenever people are traumatized today, we try to find some way to give them some kind of therapy. But throughout this 400 years, we have gotten no therapy, okay? Just the trauma. And so what we're left with is something that a couple of people have been focusing on, which they call post-traumatic stress, which is a post-traumatic stress syndrome, but it's called post-traumatic slave syndrome. And it not only talks about the impact of the enslavement experience, but also the impact of everything that has happened since then. And Black Americans are victims of intergenerational trauma from slavery and racism. Slavery was an exploitative system some 5 or 6 generations ago. I know my great-grandmother was born enslaved, and I've heard stories about all the things that happened. So it's not a pretty story, but if we continue to ignore it, I don't think we're going to get anywhere. Dr. Joy DeGruy is doing a lot of work trying to get us to understand the impact of slavery, as I said, which is generational. And the thing that she wants us to understand is only through an appreciation of the full reality of American slave that Black Americans will understand. First, the enormity of the crime, and second, that the descendants of the enslaved, we have nothing to be ashamed of. So many Africans are afraid and shamed by what happened to them, something that they had no control over. But we have to find ways to get rid of it. And so that's she's a psychologist, and she's working on that. So there's a lot to talk about, and we're only beginning to put this material together. Randall Robinson agrees with everything that she has said, because he says the psychosocial consequences of American slavery, both for the descendants and the enslaved, as well as the descendants of the enslavers, helps us understand the multifaceted impact of slavery on Black lives. So when I talk to the county about zero youth detention, why in Albany County it's mostly Blacks who are sent to these facilities, and I say to them, do you understand maybe why? Because if we don't, we'll just continue to do the same thing and to destroy our children and our lives. So what can we do to repair the significant harm that's done? And it's considerable, and we don't have time to go into it all, but I just want to introduce you to what we're doing. So we need to know what we can do as individuals or in our communities to start thinking about and talking about the horrible thing that happened and its impact, because it's affecting us today. It didn't go away. So we're seeking at the Center for Law and Justice, we're seeking partners with community groups and organizations to teach what we see as the true history and experience of African Americans in this country. And we hope to develop a project and a curriculum that others in the community will adopt and work with us to make sure that message gets crossed. The other thing is we're looking very closely at how we can work with the New York State Reparations Commission. Many people don't want to talk about reparations because they see it in terms of dollars and cents, and it might affect their pocket. Okay, that's not totally what it's about. It is about money because we've been, as I said, exploited for so many years, but it doesn't have to be strictly money. So we're going to be working with people in the community to talk to them about what they think they need to feel whole to some extent, and what can organizations and communities do. So the New York State Reparations Commission, which will meet starting in September, and communities have to be ready, and the residents to testify before that commission. And as I said, their work will begin in earnest in September. And people still must ask the question, what is reparations? And as I said, we're not just talking about money. You have to think about what you do when you think you're doing something good, and ask yourselves whether it is simply a distraction or whether it can help repair the damage. I was reminded of when we first went to Africa. I was told by some middle-class people who had gone there, they said, you got to take something with you. You can't just go to Africa. You got to give something to the poor people. So they convinced me that I had to take along ballpoint pens. They said, that's the best thing. So I believed them, and I took the ballpoint pens, and as I was handing them out, there was an African-American there who was doing some work in Africa for the community. And he said to me, you know, ballpoint pens run out of ink. I said, exactly. It hit me so hard. That's exactly what happened. He says, I'm here working to build a clinic, medical clinic, and a school. And so we joined with him and supported his efforts to do that. So I think we have to look at some of the things that we do and ask ourselves those same questions. Is this simply a ballpoint pen, or can you do something else? And you have to, as we look at the impact of all of this, I mean, we can see it in the data that, in terms of the gaps between incomes of blacks and whites. We can see it in medical care. We can see it in housing. We can see it in so many ways that Al mentioned earlier. So it's up to us to start examining ourselves, to figure out who we are and what we're willing to do to make that freedom really be true. We're talking a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but I'm here to tell you it won't make any difference to me until you understand that I am a human being. Because what this whole history has done was to dehumanize Black people. We still have that in our minds when we think about a Black person, that they're not quite human. I grew up in an area where I was the only, our family was about the only one that was Black in the area. And I believed it. White supremacy tells not only comes from you and tells white people that they are superior, but it affects me too. I believed everything they said, that I was inferior. And so I look at our children that we work with and wonder how they feel about themselves. And they've had to find ways to cope with those feelings of inferiority. And it's a terrible blow to many people. But I think we have to do it, and we have to make, as I said, make those personal commitments. I think my time up? So the gaps are so many, but I want to also look at what a United Methodist pastor said on Juneteenth, because I thought I'll just mention a few things. He said, compared to whites, blacks and Hispanics receive less income at the same education levels. They have markedly less wealth at equivalent income levels. So there's and we're, racially and ethnically stigmatized even before we try to go anywhere. So we've got to understand that. So not only are we dehumanized, but we're also traumatized, and you can't forget that. But he said that Juneteenth is a stark reminder that freedom and equality have never come easily or swiftly to Black Americans. Even the Emancipation Proclamation did not abolish slavery. The lag exposes the enduring gap between America's lofty ideals and the lived experiences of its Black citizens. And he says it's a chasm that persists today. The struggles that fuel the Black Lives Matter movement, the systemic racism ingrained in the nation's justice system, the wealth gap rooted in generations of disenfranchisement, the representation that remains tokenism in many halls of power are the remnants of the unfinished work that began on Juneteenth. And as Black Americans commemorate Juneteenth, they also honor, and I don't want to forget that, they also honor the lineage of strength that of people that have weathered the storms of slavery. And people recognize that now when I talk to them about the Middle Passage. Some tell me, well, at least they survived, which means that no understanding of first the strength of those people, but also what they went into. They went into something that was just as bad. And so that also bothers me a lot. But perhaps the most vital truth that Juneteenth imparts is that the work of racial justice is never truly done. Observance of Juneteenth should not be an act of complacency, but a call to action. And that's what I'm talking about. I want you to feel so deeply, have some reaction to that history. When I see pictures of the Jewish Holocaust during the 40s and parents and children being separated, I often cry. That tells me that I'm human. But when we hear all of these terrible things and they mean nothing to us, you are in some way saying, I also do not think of you as a human. And unless we start doing that, when you see that black kid walking down the street and you assume that he's going to be doing something bad, that he's inherently criminal, that something's wrong with him, you are feeding into this terrible thing that we have before us, and we've got to get rid of it. So if any of you are interested in joining with us, we're putting together this whole project, as I mentioned, to make sure that we can tell the real story, but not just to tell the real story, but recognize the humanity of people, understand the impact, the trauma and its impact on us. So going back to Africa and Sankofa, we've got to understand, we can't really understand the current situation in our lives and in this country and the world until we go back and understand, clearly see the past. And we can't clearly see the past if we're just going to sugarcoat everything and say, hey, something's wrong with them. We need to look within ourselves. And that's what I'm hoping we can do. Juneteenth is both a rejoicing and a reckoning, and it invites us to revel in the progress forged by generations of Black Americans, even as it illuminates a long road still to be traveled. And I hope that you will join with us as we embark on this journey to make sure that people in our community and this country and the world understand that sordid history that's still a part of us. It hasn't gone anywhere. Thank you. Have a final word or two. Just want to remind you, in our research, we found so many ways that reparations have been paid to people throughout this country and other countries. So it's not new. And that's one of the things we want to make sure people understand. But there are, I'd like to leave a last couple of questions that I think you should ponder. What do we think about the possibility that would have happened if African Americans would not have been kidnapped, that they were brought here or came here as immigrants? I think it raises a real question that we all must think about. And what do you think their lives would be like if in 1865, when people say we got freedom, that they had been given equal rights according to the United States Constitution? I think we'd have a different world. And I think I know the answer to those questions. We extinguish this flame, but not fight in the light. Again.
I also wanted to mention to you that Dr. Green's memoirs are for sale in the back, and all proceeds go to the Center for Law and Justice. I've read the book, and it's a fascinating look into some of the unwritten history of Albany. Some of us, and maybe most of us, know that there was an interesting political history back during the Hackett and O'Connell and Corning years, and some people say, well, you know, there was good stuff and bad stuff. Read Alice's book. She will expose probably some of the most, I don't know what the right word is, but what really was happening during that era. And as I mentioned, all proceeds for the sale of that book will go to the Center for Law and Justice. And I would also encourage you to talk with Dr. Green about the center. It's something that I have contributed to personally, and I hope that other people will be inspired to do so. So we're glad you joined us today, and this concludes our service.